Hello, Crypters. Before we get started, at the very top of the show notes, there is a GoFundMe link. That is not for me. That is for a community in Pennsylvania that really needs your help for some educational purposes. To put it simply, as their GoFundMe page says, what will your money be primarily going towards? A large event tent to enable us to pop up classes and play events and not be completely restricted by venue size and layout, printing costs, signage, flyers, and of course, swag. They are trying to do some good things and some outreach work. If you could, whether it's $1 or meet their goal with donating $2,000, please help them out. Again, that link is at the very top of the show notes. And with that said, let's jump into it.
Welcome to my dungeon.
Welcome to Cauldron's Crypt. I'm your host, Master Cauldron. If you're new to the show, I use my 24 years of BDSM experience and 20 years working in the psychology field to dispel myths, get rid of stereotypes, and answer your questions about BDSM. You can call in at 865-268-4005 to leave your questions or visit the crypt at cauldronscrypt.com. On this episode of The Crypt, I'm going to hit those rules to love by, and then it's back to DomCon LA 2019 for a conversation with Rhiannan Aarons, where we get back to some basics and talk about her kinky art. And just a heads up, there are a few spots in this interview with Rhiannan where my mixer was acting up a little bit, but don't worry, it's just 2 or 3 times that it happens, and they're very brief, so it shouldn't interrupt. Rules to love by. Rule number 1, safe, sane, consensual, and informed. Rule number 2, kinky. That's KNKI and comes from the Kinky app, available on all platforms. Not a sponsor, but it does stand for knowledge, no intolerance, kindness, and integrity. And rule number 3, the quote from Mr. Paul Young. Submission is not about authority, and it's not about obedience. It is all about relationships of love and respect. All right, it is Saturday at DomCon Los Angeles 2019. Today I am talking with Rhiannan Aarons.
Indeed.
An artiste.
Indeed.
A former pro dominatrix.
Yes, I was.
Let's start there.
All right. Well, I got into the industry straight out of art school around 2005. I found an ad in Craigslist, the source of all things good and evil, saying assistant dominatrix, $50 an hour. So I responded. I started the next day. My first session was by far the strangest session I ever had, where we had someone come in and he wanted to cross-dress while wearing rabbit ears while we whipped him with feather boas.
Fascinating.
It was so much fun. So then I had my first foot fetishist, and then I was hooked for the next 10 years, pretty much.
Wow. So you like having your feet worshipped, do you?
Oh, I do very much. I can actually cut into orgasm from having my feet worshipped,
wow.
If people do it just right.
That's, I would love to see that.
I'd love to show you, because that means I get to have a foot rub and an orgasm, and it's just win, 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 win. So much win all around.
Oh, now those that know me know that I am definitely not into feet. I have more of a foot phobia than a foot fetish. But for that, I would, yeah. So were you into kink prior to responding to this ad?
I was. I actually started in the lifestyle when I was 14.
Wow.
With non-sexual power exchange. So what happened is that I had an 11-year-old boy who lived down the street from me, and he was being bullied by this other kid that lived near us who was a lot bigger than he was. And there was one day I intercepted something that was going down where this kid was just about to kick his ass. And so my little friend, the 11-year-old, said, you know, I want to give you my life because you've saved my life. This very, like, melodramatic, excessive gesture, right? And so he followed me around and started calling me Mistress. And he had a foot fetish. He knew at 11 he had a foot fetish. And he wanted to just, like, sit under my desk while I did my homework and rub my feet and get me glasses of water. And, you know, we went on that way for a few years until he went to high school and got a real girlfriend who was kinky. And I started dating someone who had a Batman fetish. fetish, so I was dressing like Catwoman for him, and we just kind of went our separate ways. But, it was interesting, and it was a very rewarding relationship, and we're still friends as adults.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, may I ask your age, or is that off limits?
I am, well, let's see, I stopped remembering my age after I turned 35. My estimate right now, I just stopped thinking about it. I think I'm around 30, it's 2019.
Yeah.
So I'm 37 right now. I had to do some serious math there.
So at 14, you're having this experience. This is lasting a while until he got into high school. What furthered that experience? Now, are you in your private life, were you switchy, or are you just all dominant?
It's very spectral. So I normally don't submit to anyone unless it's someone who's clearly above my skill level. So I tend to bottom for people I feel like I can learn from. So typically older women who have been in the lifestyle for a long time, or situations where I will switch. I'm not too keen on switching for men because I was trained by a matrofascist, so it just doesn't feel right to me. But occasionally, if I see someone at a play party who's just like a master with some kind of implement, say, all right, I'll get up on the cross just to see what this feels like so that I can do it to someone else.
Oh, I love that approach. So many people could learn from that. And we are a 101, so that is an excellent lesson from someone with years of experience, cryptors, that no matter what your position is in the lifestyle and outside the lifestyle, if you find somebody that you have an opportunity to learn from, take it.
Yeah, and that's also something I really love about the lifestyle where, not only are things spectral, right? I mean, you can be a top, a bottom, a switch, and within those there's more categories, right? Like you can be a service top, a service bottom, but also that things are so relative. I mean, you can be a very dominant personality and then run into someone who is more alpha than you, and you just respond to that intuitively. There are some people that just really inspire submission.
Yeah, and that's sometimes hard for some of us to accept.
Right, and there's some people that are very strong alphas, and for me, the number of people I've submitted to is small. It's not a huge number of people, but the people I did submit to, I submitted to for quite a while, to really just kind of understand the dynamics of that relationship and just being in a different headspace. When I was pro-doming a lot, very intensely, I would in my private life get more into certain kinds of masochism and bondage because obviously you're topping all the time. You want something that's a little bit different when you get done.
Yeah.
Of 8 hours of topping. So everyone has limits.
Right. So now 12, 13 years of being professional, was that all you did during that time, or did you maintain another job? Was this full-time?
There were windows where I did it full-time. I was doing videos in the beginning. I usually maintained some other kind of job just because I liked having something that was kind of normal to compare it to, because when I was doing it full-time, I found it was very hard for me to relate to like normal people I would meet in bars that weren't part of that lifestyle. And I also just hit this window where I was renting this room in a 1901 Victorian house, and I was working as a full-time mistress, and I would, live in this Victorian house and then go to work and lace up my corset and then, get out of the corset and come back to the Victorian house. And I was like, I need to do something normal, like pour coffee somewhere just to stay grounded. So I worked in, packing and shipping for a while. I did construction. I've always done art, and so that was always something I did. Of course, art is very uncertain. Domination financially is a little bit more certain.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting coupling.
Well, let's get into that, into the artistic side of things.
Yes.
Now, that is what brought you out of being a professional dom?
I always did them concurrently, really. And my art practice and the domination really kind of informed each other in a weird way. And in the beginning, I was doing pro-dom work to fund my art practice, because when you first get going, if you don't come from a family with a lot of privilege, the materials, the marketing thing, everything is just so expensive. And I found that when I worked at the larger houses, there were a lot of other artists there who were doing the same thing. And so I would run into other women who had the same teachers at art school that I had. And, when I worked at the Dominion, where I worked for most of my career, it was a really interesting site of cultural production because you had all of these women who were highly educated artists. A lot of them had master's degrees in different disciplines, and we would have hours to kill between clients. So we'd get into these amazingly in-depth conversations. And it just became this, really interesting culture there. We also had other women who were younger that were trying to get into the arts, and so there was some informal mentorship going there that was very interesting, where we would help them learn how to draw or whatever it was that they needed to build their portfolio.
So as your art career grew, you decided to step out of, is that what I'm understanding?
No, they grew pretty concurrently. And I think what really pushed me out of being a pro dominatrix was a couple years ago, I met Sherry Rose, who was Bob Flanagan's dominatrix. And he was a very well-known performance artist who had cystic fibrosis. And they would do these intense scenes, sometimes with heavy medical, sometimes with hook suspension, in gallery spaces. And they were part of the reason the NEA was defunded by Jesse Helms. He saw one of their pieces done at Olio that had some scalpel play in it and said, this is degenerate art. We shouldn't be funding this venue because they've housed these people. And I remember Sherry telling me that, you know, they went to this trial and they had this buffet out and all of the degenerate artwork was blown up on these huge posters. And all of the people who were part of this trial were walking around eating food and like looking at this degenerate art. And I said, oh, so they basically gave you an art opening before telling you that you were a degenerate and cutting all of the funding, right?
Wow.
But she and I started working together. And so what happened is that the BDSM and the art kind of fused together. And it got to a point where, you know, we were traveling a lot and it just got very hard for me to maintain a pro-dom practice and the performance practice. Because I was able to do BDSM as part of the performance, that need was being satisfied.
Oh, nice.
Also, after 2008, when the recession happened, the scene changed very drastically. And a lot of us who were in the scene before it started never really made the same amount of money again after that. And it's kind of hard to stay in the scene as a pro, knowing that it's never going to be quite as good as it was 10 years ago.
Right.
And that was really most of what got me out of it.
Yeah. It seems like it is coming back a little bit, but then you get smacked with Sesta Fosta and...
Yeah, and so, you know, we only have so much time also, and I've taken to a lot more activism lately as far as, you know, community education, making sure that kinky youth have what they need to move forward. Something I'm trying to work on right now is that I'm a lecturer at Cal State Long Beach, and I'm trying to help do student outreach to make sure that students who either identify as kinky or who have been in the sex industry are getting the psychological and health resources they need to maintain their lifestyle or change their lifestyle if they decide they don't want to be in the sex or kink industry anymore as professionals.
Oh, that's phenomenal. Is there any online access to that information if somebody is seeking that out for themselves? And
no, it's actually such a new project that we don't have anything set up. And I just met the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom, and we had a really good conversation. So I'm hoping to kind of move forward with some of their ideologies and resources and getting that out.
They are a phenomenal organization. I'm actually a kink-aware professional on their website for consulting and counseling. Susan Wright has taken up the mantle to really push forward with a lot of equality, and they did a massive amount of work. I have a history in the psych field, and they've done a lot of work for the DSM-5 to have BDSM taken out as a diagnosable mental illness. That's thanks to the NCSF.
I'm so grateful. I didn't know who was behind that. I knew someone was doing it because if you flip through the DSM, it's like, oh, some years I'm crazy and some years I'm not.
Yeah.
And that was always something I really wrestled with.
Well, they changed the language from between 3 and 4, but it was still kind of leaving us there.
Right.
But with 5, it's basically as long as this doesn't interfere with activities of daily living, then it's not diagnosable. You're just a person that enjoys these paraphilias, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I think that's really the way it should be.
Yeah.
You know, I remember when I first started working as a pro dom, I was really young, and because I was in the arts, you know, I've always been a very honest person, mainly because I'm just really bad at lying. It takes too much mental organization, and I just don't have the energy. It's too much effort. So I also did video when I was very young. I used to work under the name Mistress Foxy, and it got to the point very quickly where I was like in the AVN pre-noms, and I was like, I can't really hide this. So I was always very forthright, and I remember in the beginning when I said, you know, people go, what do you do? I'd say, oh, I'm a pro-dom. You'd hear the room just hush. You know, and all of my friends that I worked with were like, why do you tell people this? Like, we're all using different names. We're staying on the lowdown. But I just felt it was really essential. And now, people go like, oh, that's kind of cool that you used to do that.
Yeah.
So it's, but also, 50 Shades of Grey, 50 Shades of Nay. But 50 Shades, even though it's not an accurate depiction of our lifestyle, obviously, I think did us a bit of a service in normalizing this to the rest of the population.
Yeah.
I feel it changed the climate very drastically, and that people are more open to hearing about what we do now.
It has. As people that have lived it, I've been around since 95, I've done pro. We often get so involved in talking about the downsides of it and the abusive nature of 50 Shades without actually praising what it has done for society. I mean, it's Twilight fan fiction, but, society, these repressed housewives have been able to come out of their shells and be themselves, thankfully. Whether it's this strong, empowered, dominant woman or the strong, empowered, alpha submissive that they are truly inside. So,
but I think it did also impact the pro industry, because I noticed as the popularity for 50 Shades of Grey grew, that we were getting a massive drop in single male clientele. And when they would resurface, I would kind of ask, like, hey, where have you been for the last 4 months? You used to come in every week. And they'd say, oh, my wife read 50 Shades of Grey, and now we're doing this at home. So it tipped my focus more to education, too, because it is a very deep learning curve. Yeah. And I think, that's a really necessary component of our culture. The thing that was really funny, though, when 50 Shades of Grey came out, my mom called me, and she goes, she's like, hi, how you doing? So I'm doing all right. And she goes, so I just have a quick question for you. I'm like, okay, what is it? She goes, what does it mean to collar somebody? I'm like, Mom, what are you reading? She's like, oh, it's this book, 50 Shades of Grey. I'm like, all right, Mom, collaring someone is kind of like going steady. It's like giving them your class ring, but it's a dog collar. She goes, oh, okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And just hung up the phone. It's like, all right, she must be really absorbed in this book for that conversation to end that quickly.
Wow. Well, let's dive more into your art. Now, you said you do a lot of performing with people. You've been in England where the laws are a lot better with risk management, you said?
Well, risk management is a big part of any performance. And risk management, for those of you who don't know, and most people don't, because you don't know until risk management comes up to you and is like, these are the potential problems. Risk management is essentially the process of working with insurance companies at venues and art institutions to do a performance in a way that satisfies the insurance brokers who are attached to the institution. So it's a lot easier to insure things like this in England. There's more mechanisms for it, or in Europe in general. Okay. There's a performance artist's insurance policy that gives you this huge international coverage, and it's something like £50 a year to buy it. To get the same kind of coverage in America, I had to call several brokers. They told me they would have to craft us a custom policy, and it would be at least $3,000 a year.
Wow.
So ANN is the artists network that we use our insurance through, and they're absolutely reasonable. The other thing is that because of the culture wars, the thing that happened with Helms and the NEA and Olio and Robert Mapplethorpe, we don't have any funding for performance art here at all, really, and so we definitely don't have any funding for performance art that talks about our lifestyle. So in England, they have council funding for all performance art, and the argument there is that if they're funding art from people who are heteronormative, that they also, and not kinky, they need to also fund art from people who are not heteronormative and who are kinky, so everyone's voice is heard. And so that's just kind of the side effect of recent shifts in cultural history that have happened, and it's a very different scene over there.
America does seem to have a intolerance for tolerance.
Yeah, that's a very sad thing about our culture that I am trying to change every day of my life.
Yeah, there's the equality factor here just astounds me at times. But I will say in my 42 years, I have seen a massive amount of improvement from what it was. So we're headed there, I think, in my opinion. Maybe. It's like definitely maybe. I'm pessimistically optimistic about it.
Well, the cultural landscape of America is shifting very drastically right now, too. We're moving into a non-white majority America, and that is going to be very different when the millennials, who are mostly blended culturally, start buying houses and voting and doing all of that stuff that will eventually incite some social change if our election systems can stay unhacked. It's also a big if.
Oh, let's not get too political on that behalf. That's a touchy subject that I make it a point on this show not to get too into as far as actual political sides. One last thing that I want to talk about is this movie that you have given me this cool little sticker for.
Yes.
Which I'm just going to read what it says here on the sticker. Spider, be afraid, be very afraid, and very drunk. TheSpiderMovie.com. And then she follows up by saying, it's Ron Jeremy.
It is. So the way this film happened was completely accidental, and the story is pretty funny. I was browsing my friend Dana Hammer's blog the day after Christmas. She's married to a close friend of mine from grade school, and she's a writer. She publishes horror comedy novels. And so they're gross, and they're also funny, and they're really entertaining. And I was reading the short story she wrote about this woman who comes home really, really drunk and then finds a giant spider in her apartment that she has to fight off. But she's really, really drunk and trying to fight the spider. So she's also like calling people to get her to help fight the spider. But of course, because it's 3 a.m. and she's drunk, they don't believe that there's a giant spider in her apartment, or at least that the spider is as big as she's claiming it is. So I read this and I said, this would be a great short film. I said, maybe we can do this with a bad rubber spider. So I sent a copy of it, the blog link, to my friend Dulcinea Cercelli, who has produced this webisode series called The Whore of Babylon, where she is an undead sex worker avenger who fights racism. And I thought, this might be an interesting collaboration. She came back to me a few days later and she's like, I love this story. I've adapted the script. I found us some seed funding. Let's do this. And then I was talking to Dana and she was so excited about this. And I said, we either need a bad rubber spider. I said, or maybe I can, jokingly, I said, maybe I can get Ron Jeremy to wear a spider suit for us. And so Dana replied by saying, that's some bucket list stuff. And so I was like, all right, I had just met Ron several times. I'd met Ron several times on the Susan Block show. And we had sex on the Susan Block show once also. So I felt comfortable calling him to do this. And he did. And so we ended up with Ron Jeremy in the spider suit that was made by one of my friends that I hijacked because she had just finished working for Sesame Street. So it's pretty fantastic.
Just almost, I was taking a drink when you said that.
I was going for the spit take. I was vaguely disappointed that didn't happen.
Yeah,
that's my sadistic side. I'm sorry. Not sorry.
Goodness. So to go from Sesame Street to doing a horror movie casting porn star Ron Jeremy.
Spider suit's a spider suit.
Hey. That's like $20 is $20.
It really is. At the end of the day.
Oh, well, are there any really interesting, I know your first session that you said as a pro, that was crazy. What other stories do you like to tell from that time?
Oh, my tales from the crypt. I really like unusual fetishes. So one of my favorite clients that I ever had was someone who liked to be beat with purses. And so he would come in and we'd all line up to beat him with the purse because no one else would ask her this. It all starts to become pretty routine after a while for 10 years, and so I take certain things for granted. And I'll be talking to people at a bar or something and be like, oh yeah, we had this guy up on the table and we had him butterfly boarded. And then they're like, what's butterfly boarded? Like, we had a bunch of needles in his testicles. People like that. Some people like that. Yes. And, then we catheterized him and then and they were like, wait, you do this all the time? I'm like, well, yeah, it was Tuesday. I just, forget that some people can't do this while drinking a glass of orange juice at that stage in their life. But I apparently now can. But I don't know. The whole scene was just so active when I was coming up. Oh, one of the really good stories I had, though, is a lifestyle story and not a pro one, where I met these two amazing women that I was working at with the dungeon. I was working with at the dungeon, and we went to Miss Kitty's. I don't know if you ever went to Miss Kitty's when it was in its heyday.
No.
It was this huge BDSM club out of the Dragonfly in West Hollywood. And I was at the bar and I was drinking, and all of a sudden these two women in geisha makeup and like full attire came up with their parasols and just like grabbed me and started making out with me. And I was like, what is going on here? Like, I'm not going to question it. And then they started tying me up, and I was like, this is still pretty kind of cool. And then they blindfolded me and they started leading me out, and they felt me kind of tense. And one of them leaned in my ear and whispered, she said, "It's okay, it's us." It was two people I had known, but they were in the full makeup, so I didn't recognize them. And they took me home with them. And of course, you know, things that are probably untoward for a podcast happened after that, or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe you want the details.
For this one, yes.
You can use your imagination.
We are not banned in any country
yet.
And if I throw an explicit tag on there, then we automatically immediately lose 57 countries.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I might already be banned in 7 just by being me. So.
Yeah. Well, everybody has a message, and that's what I'm saying to everyone here when I'm asking for interviews. You certainly have a life of experience, and one that demands respect, in my opinion. If you could break it down in what you do with art and risk management and memories of the pro days and just a culmination of your soul, what would your message be?
My message is to be kind. BDSM is an act of affection and an act of kindness, and I know that a lot of people who don't understand our lifestyle don't see it that way, but it truly is. And I think that if that kindness can be duplicated in normal parts of life, that we would have a much better world across the board.
Amen, sister. That is beautiful.
Hey, women.
Thank you so much for your time. That website for the Spider movie is
thespidermovie.com. Also, if you want to see some more of my work, the other things I make, or get in touch with me, you can go to RhiannanAarons.com.
All right, Rhiannon, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And listeners, please do reach out. She is an amazing person. I can tell that just sitting across for a few seconds. You should see this smile.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
All right. Don't forget to help out the Northeast Pennsylvania kink group on FetLife by going to the GoFundMe page at the top of the show notes. Also, if you haven't checked out the bonding experience with Mistress Vega and Lady Katie, that is a YouTube 101 channel directed from the femdom, not fin, but femdom perspective. There's a link in the show notes there as well. A huge shout out to pro producer LilyxChaosx, executive producers Feline Rouge, Baby Love 2269, Faisil, Jeremiah, ArcaneD.G.R, and violetaurelia. Senior producers Matt, Roxiebear, XEmeraldxWolfx, JayKay, SortOutTheKinks, Delilah, SirMutualRespect, Master Gabriel, and Theod123. Producers Kainsin, ThatPlace in Oklahoma City. That's a dungeon. If you guys haven't checked it out, you really should. The owners there are absolutely amazing. Thank you, Miter. Olive Eyes, Zine, and Alexandria. And then, of course, our junior producers, K2SO, who has been with me since the very beginning. Buffalo Domme 84, another one that's been around for a long time. LxSoumis, Hayley, Morgan, Not the Daddy, and Raefe. Again, apologies for not pronouncing your name correctly. If you would like to become one of our show producers, if you're getting anything out of this, please help us out here. Keep the lights on at the crypt. The link is in the show notes. BDSM contracts, if you haven't checked them out by now, what are you doing? BDSMcontracts.org. Use coupon code Cauldron20, that's KULDRIN20 for a 20% discount on all purchases. Daycollars.com, a place for personalized handmade collars, leashes, cuffs, and belts. Whipping Stripes, my personal maker of all things leather and paracord impact toys. That is at whippingstripes.com. And Torrid Timber, phenomenal crafted devices there. Speaking of breast torture, he has some amazing breast humblers, has some man torture devices as well. Highly recommend checking out what he has at torridtimber.com. None of these people that I've spoke of are sponsors for the show. They are people that I know, like, use, and trust. Next time on The Crypt, not particularly certain what I'm going to talk about. All of my contact information is in the show notes. This has been Master Cauldron and Rhiannan Aarons for CauldronScript.com. Unearth the truth. Well, Crypters, either you are a super fan, you couldn't stop your phone from playing right now, or you've got this whole skip silence thing. I use that in my podcatcher. Apparently, I've saved like 4,000 hours or something crazy. So it's been a week late in me putting out an episode. Now I've saved this to the end just to see who is going to catch this. Things have changed in my world drastically. I have switched jobs and shifts and fighting to get everything together to open up a club. I had a place, formed the LLC, got all that back from the state, and then found out that the landlord changed his mind and is not going to rent. So we have searched high and low and looked and looked and looked at several other places. And there are two possibilities right now. Either one of them would be perfect. They're bigger than what I wanted. They're more expensive considerably than what I wanted. Basically, with what I think that we're going to average for attendance, the club is going to make about $600 a month. That is without me getting paid or without any actual employees. That's with all volunteer work. So everything that's brought in will go to pay the bills, and then there'll be $600 a month set aside for any upgrades that we want to make, that we need to make, that the community needs. And that's what's the deciding factor on all the furniture, all the hard points for rope suspension, there's just so much. Master Miter, who I don't know if I've referred to him before as Master Miter. I don't know if he has earned his cover in the leather community. But as far as I'm concerned, he is certainly a man who is worthy of my ultimate respect. So, Miter, forgive me if that is not an earned title, but it is something that I feel because of your service to the community, that from my interactions with you and your advice and time that you've taken to help mentor me on club ownership and the unasked questions that I have that I know that you're going to answer. Thank you so much. Master Cecil at the Woodshed down in Orlando. Same with you. These two people are phenomenal human beings. Anybody that knows them are blessed to know them. Hopefully one day I'll get to meet Miter in person in Oklahoma City at ThatPlace, which is just a really cool name for a dungeon. Same thing with the Woodshed. Going to take you out back to the Woodshed. Yep, that's what that's about. So anyway, have you ever just hit the wall? You go and go and go, and you give and give and give, and you don't give to receive anything in return. Or even if you do, you're going to run out of the ability to give, and you have to reset. That's what this past 2 weeks has been for me. And why I haven't released an episode. And I'm going to have to take some more time every now and then. Not right now. Every now and then. If you're a Patreon producer, a supporter, thank you so much. If hearing that I'm going to have to skip a week every now and then means that you no longer wish to support the show, totally get it. Totally fine with it. I'm grateful for all that you've given thus far, and I will certainly wish you the best if you choose to end that Patreon support. Speaking of that, we had a really good meeting, an online munch, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before. There was quite a few people in attendance. Those are for Patreon producers only. You can get an invitation to those for $1 a month. Not that I'm trying to sell those to you. But they are pretty cool. We just get in there, and they always start off really slow. People kind of ho-humming around about talking about things, but they do kick off eventually, and people start asking some questions, and it gets pretty fun, in my opinion. Just some open banter. So it might be something that you want to consider. Regardless of when I release episodes, we're still going to keep those up at least once a month. And I'll be putting out some content for for Patreon that is a little less polished. That is more like, what they call on YouTube raw vlogging. Some will be video, some will be just a podcast version of it, but only on Patreon. So anyway, back to what I was saying. I'm a little tangential tonight, as you can tell. It's not near as early in the morning. Usually I record these about 3 or 4 a.m. But as I've said, I've had a schedule change and a job change. I'm with the same company, just doing a totally different job. So, yeah, it's really rocked my world, and my wife and my submissives as well. So, and it's not a step up or a step down. It was a step sideways, but eventually it's going to be better for us all. We just have to get used to it. So in hitting that wall, God, I really am all over the place. In hitting that wall, it is very difficult for me. And this is one of the downfalls that people get into. You know, you've heard getting high on your own supply, drinking your own Kool-Aid, this sort of thing. All of these has such negative connotation. But at the same time, when you're a person that wants to give, to help, that really has the heart of a teacher, and you expect nothing in return, you eventually get to a place to where you just have to stop. It's like with jobs. You know, you work your job, you're giving your time, you're expecting a paycheck in return. And that's the deal that you make. But you hit a wall and you need a vacation. And it's the same thing here. My mind completely fried out where, yeah, I've still got some of these interviews. And speaking of this Rhiannan Aarons interview that you just listened to, man, I really wasn't in it when I talked to her. And that's a shame, because what you heard was just so minimal to the information that she has. But between being wore out at DomCon and becoming frustrated with my mixer and it causing these problems, and the static that you hear in the feedback loop, it was just nothing I did could fix it until I basically pulled everything apart and then put it all back together. But I had to wait until the end of the interview to do that, because, you know, people are at cons and they have a set time that they can talk to you, and, you know, they don't want to wait an hour. And, you know, I mean, she may have, I didn't ask her, to be fair. But I'm so thankful to her for sitting down, because I did edit out some of these long pauses that I had to make while all we could hear, or all I could hear in my headphones, was this noise coming from the mixer. And so, you know, there were a few times in mid-sentence that we had to take a reset. And when I started editing this, it really got to me. It frustrated me. And yeah, so I took a little time off, took a week off, from the show, and then some other things going on in my personal life that have just really wore me out. So I'm just saying, from time to time, bear with me. I know you don't expect anything of me. All of the messages that I get from you guys are absolute love and respect and cherishment. And I posted on Twitter a few weeks ago how amazing it was to know that I've affected so many relationships in such a positive way. And that's not me being arrogant. That's basing that on what you guys have told me through your messages and your emails and your voicemails and your conversations, and your driving to Knoxville from other cities and other states or inviting me to come to other cities and other states. I mean, I was invited to DomCon by Master Gabriel, who first was a listener and now is a friend. And there's several of you that are like that. You were listeners and now you're friends, and which makes it awkward for me when you're still listeners as friends. But yeah, you get to know the real me. And by that, I mean, in the show, I can edit my flaws. I can talk about them, and express that I have them and tell you about them. But because you don't actually see them, it's kind of, off to the side. But my friends, that fourth wall, as they call it in TV and movies, is broken. Every time Deadpool stopped to look at the computer, the fourth wall, or the computer. Wow, my computer screen just changed colors and it kind of threw me off for a second. But no, every time that in the Deadpool movies, he stops and he talks to the camera. He's talking to the audience. And you see clearly what's going on in his head and in his life and in his heart. And I can tell you about it, and I can portray it as much as possible on here. But, yeah, so I'm really grateful to a lot of people for the past 3 years and 80 episodes of The Crypt, plus the ones that I've released on Patreon. So that's, I think, 94 episodes total. I think there's 14 of them on Patreon that are not in the regular feed. And I could be way off. It could only be 4 or 5. I know I've recorded a bunch. I don't remember how many I've actually published on Patreon. So anyway, don't be like, 14 more episodes to listen to. I've got to join, and then get there and there's only 4 or 5, and then be disappointed because I really don't remember how many is on there right now. But anyway, guys, seriously, thank you so much. If you have listened all the way to the end of this, yeah, you're either really bored, really care about what I have to say, or you're trying to find out information so you can figure out where I live and come end me. I don't know. All right. Well, I will be talking to you again very soon. Today, I believe, is the end of Wednesday, September 4th, 2019. Yeah, so it is 10:47 Eastern Time, September the 4th, 2019. So this will be going out Thursday morning, and I'm going to try to do some other stuff. I'm not going to make any promises right now. As far as an extra episode to make up for it for missing last week. But anyway, in the words of Ralph Garman, love you, mean it, bye.